Find the derivative of y equals 1 over the square root of sine 2x, then evaluate y prime of pi over 8. Y here is the quotient of 1 divided by the square root of sine of 2x. Since the numerator is a constant, there's no need for the quotient rule. Instead, we can bring the denominator up as a negative exponent. But before we can do that, we need to write the denominator as an exponent. It's inside of a root, so it'll become a fractional exponent. It's the first power and second square root. 1 over 2, 1/2. We can now bring that to the numerator with that 1. Multiplying by 1 is equal to itself. So it'll be sine of 2x raised to the negative 1/2 power. The negative 1/2 power is the outermost function for our derivative, y prime, which can also be called dy dx. We'll start with the power rule. Bring the power down, leave the inside exactly as we see it, subtract 1 from the power. I'm going to call that 2/2. But because the inside of that power is not just an x, we have to take the derivative of that inside to complete the chain rule. The derivative of sine of 2x is cosine of 2x, but because the inside of that trig function is not just an x, again we have to take the derivative of that inside, the derivative of 2x, which is a 2, to complete that chain rule. This is a double chain rule. We have a 2x inside of a trig, which is itself was inside of a power function. That's a double chain rule. Now everything is multiplied here, so this 2 can move out front with the negative 1/2. And so I can write it as negative 1/2 times 2. And I will have a sine of 2x to the minus 1 minus 2, negative 3/2 power, and then a cosine of 2x. The 2 here and the 2 here, 1 in the numerator, 1 in the denominator, they can cancel. In the numerator, I have a negative 1, and I have a cosine of 2x. And then that sine of 2x to the negative 3/2 can move to the denominator and be sine of 2x to the positive 3/2. There's our derivative y prime or dy dx. The next thing to do is to evaluate y prime of pi over 8. That means to plug a pi over 8 in for all of our x's. So that will give me a negative cosine of 2 pi over 8 over a sine of 2 pi over 8, quantity raised to the 3/2 power. Now the 2 and the 8 can reduce, cancel out, leaving a 4 in the denominator for each of those, meaning that I have the negative cosine of pi over 4 over the sine of pi over 4, quantity raised to the 3/2 power. The cosine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. The sine of pi over 4 is the same thing, root 2 over 2. But it will be quantity raised to the 3/2 power. Now the 3/2 power means the cube power in the square root, and you can write it in either order. For this one, it might be easier to run the cubed power first, and then the square root second. So the 1/2 will mean a square root, and the 3 will mean the cube. And I'm going to run the cube first by writing 3 of them. So there it is being cubed, and then it's under square root. That's what 3/2 power means. The reason that may be easier is because we can now multiply the numerators and denominators. And so we will have the square root of root 2 times root 2 is 2, times a third root 2 will just be 2 root 2. So 2 root 2, and then over 2 times 2 times 2 which will give us an 8. This 2 and this 8 can cancel down, leaving a 4. So what we have is negative of root 2 over 2, and then all of that over, and we can break that overall square root over each of them. The square root of the square root of 2 over the square root of 4. Now the square root of the square root may look kind of funny, but we can rewrite that. Square root is 1/2 power. If you take something to the 1/2 power and then the 1/2 power again, you multiply those powers. That is, you multiply the roots. Square root, second root, 2 times 2 is 4th root of 2. Or you can think of it as 1/2 times 1/2, which gives you 1/4. Either way you look at it, we will have the 4th root of 2. And the square root of 4 is a 2. At this point, we now have a fraction in the numerator, fraction in the denominator. We can reciprocate and multiply. So I will have negative root 2 over 2 times the reciprocal, which will be 2 over the 4th root of 2. These 2's can cancel, and I have negative square root of 2 over the 4th root of 2. Since both of those roots involve a 2, we will be able to combine them. It's probably easiest to rewrite as fractional exponents. So 2 to the 1/2 and 2 to the 1/4. And you can combine them by subtracting the exponents. So this will give us negative 2 to the common denominator, 2/4 minus 1/4. 2/4 minus 1/4 is 1/4. Now keep in mind, only the 2 is raised to the 1/4 power. That negative is not. That's sitting in front of it. 1/4 power means 4th root. And so overall I'm getting negative of the 4th root of 2.